So we want to come together this morning and kind of expand a little bit on some of the ideas we talked about last week to take them to what is likely their next logical step. And last week we were talking about preparing for the coming of the Christ, the Christmas holiday. And during that talk, I shared some ideas about, what is this thing called the Christ? What does it mean to us? I mentioned Meister Eckhart, who around the year 1300 was giving his Christmas Eve sermon to his little congregation in the Rhine Valley in Germany, and told them that the events that happened 1,300 years ago in Palestine might as well never happened if the people did not know what it meant to them. What was their personal understanding of this event of the coming of the Christ? What does that mean? And Christ was one of those words like love or like God that when you use it, when people use it, when ministers use it, everybody hears something different. It means something different to everyone. So we go through this period every year. We go through this cycle, in the liturgical calendar, they call it, in the church calendar from olden days, they had a year of natural progressions of religious holidays. And the idea was that people would go every year and they would kind of repeat through these holidays, through the cycle of holidays. And hopefully each year they would understand them or experience them or both a little bit deeper, a little bit more. Emerson is kind of referred to as one of the great thinkers and great philosophical thinkers and great religious thinkers in our country. And Emerson only had 26 sermons, and he repeated each sermon twice every year. 26 written sermons. That was what Emerson left behind. And the idea is that we hear kind of the same general message. We hear it repeated, but each time we hear it, we get something different out of it because we are different people. The old saying, you can't step in the same stream twice. Everything is moving, everything is evolving, our consciousness is changing, so we hear things that sound similar, but have a deeper meaning to us, a more profound meaning to us. The scripture is like that. You can pick up a book of scripture of the world's religions, and you can start to read it, and every time you read it, you'll get something a little bit different out of it. Your consciousness has changed since the last time you read it. Pick up the Science of Mind textbook and read it. In January, we go back to the basics, and we cover the first 4 chapters in the book, and I've been doing it for God only knows how many years now. And every year I do it, and I read a paragraph or two in that chapter, and I think, I've never seen that before. So, as we individually, as you and I are kind of in this Advent season, as we are preparing ourselves for this Christmas holiday, for this coming of the Christ into our lives, we have to understand, well, what does that mean? What does the Christ mean? And it means many different things to many different people. That doesn't stop people from arguing that their way is the right way and the only right way. And you have to wonder sometimes when people are arguing that we need to celebrate Christmas in a particular way. Well, what is their definition of that? What do they mean by that? As I say with the term God, there's so many different interpretations, so many different meanings that it's kind of a waste of time to even have a discussion about God without defining it. Emmett Fox, in one of his writings, said, if you find someone who doesn't believe in God, ask them to describe the God that they don't believe in, because it's very likely that you don't believe in that kind of a God either. Joseph Campbell, in one of his discussions with Bill Moyers, said he was coming down the steps of a building in New York City, and one of the street preachers there in New York City, the street preachers would be standing on the street or on a corner, and they would have a Bible in one hand and an American flag in the other. And I don't know why, but they did. And the street preacher stops Joseph Campbell in his tracks and says, "Do you believe in God?" And of course, Joseph Campbell was professor of mythology. And Campbell smiled and said, "Yes, I do. I believe in all of them." And he looked at the preacher's Bible and he says, "Oh, yes, and I believe in that one too." And he walked on his way. And that was his humorous way of kind of pointing out there are many different interpretations. So what we have to do is we have to kind of understand a little bit, well, why is that so? Why are there so many definitions? Why are there so many different interpretations? Is there any one right one for us? Or are there multiple right ones for us? What is it that we're preparing to receive if we don't quite understand our definition, see? So that's why it's important to us. We want to come to an understanding of this year in our life, as this rock goes around the sun, this year in our life, as we come to this kind of Christmas season again. What is our understanding? What is it that we are preparing to receive? So probably it's important to understand why there are so many different understandings or so many different definitions of things, such as terms such as God or the Christ or of love. And the reason is we're different people. See, we're all at different levels of consciousness. We're at different levels of unfoldment in our spiritual journey. The Dalai Lama says that there are many religions and there's only one religion. And he says there's many religions because there's many different people, but for each person there's one religion that's right for them, and that's the one that they ought to follow. We each have different ways of seeing the world. We each have different ways of understanding the world. We each have different background, experience, and education. We each have a different level of practice in terms of how much time we spend in our prayer, in our meditation, in our studying, and in our spiritual works, as we talked last week, in our repentance, in our forgiveness, in our charity, in our sharing, and all of the things that we're told to do as good things to do to open our hearts and open our souls. But we're each at different levels. And it's okay, because we're all unique. That's what makes us unique. We have been created as individuals. Dr. Holmes tells us this, right? The divine created us out of itself as an individualized expression of itself. And we are to develop our uniqueness. That is our gift to the divine, our uniqueness. Seeing life in a unique way, experiencing life in a unique way, expressing life in a unique way, and realizing that it is the divine that is experiencing through us and as us. And our uniqueness is our gift to each other. So it's not uncommon, nor is it wrong for people to have different degrees of understanding or different levels of understanding of our relationship with God. If you read the email last night, I kind of used the study of the principle of mathematics. In Europe they call it maths with an S on the end. Here in the U.S. we call it math, but it's called maths because there's several different disciplines. And you can't just go jump in at calculus. Well, you can, but if you're like me, you're probably not going to get very far because you don't have the necessary fundamental understandings of other fields of mathematics in order to grasp what calculus is even trying to tell us. So for someone who has absolutely no experience, whether it be a small child or whether it be an adult who just has never had any experience with mathematics, the teacher will meet the student at the student's point of readiness. Right? This is one of the principles that we learned in adult learning, how to prepare material for adults, workshops, classes, Sunday services, those kind of things. We have to meet people wherever they are. We can't meet them where they're going to be in 2 years. We can't meet them where they were 10 years ago. We have to meet them where they are. We have to meet them at their point of readiness. So in mathematics, a person who has no experience whatsoever with mathematics begins with arithmetic. Simple numbers. What are numbers? What are whole numbers? How do you add? How do you subtract? How do you divide? How do you multiply? Very simple operations, but we have to get those down. We have to understand those, because if we don't, see, then when we try to move on to the next level, we try to move into fractions, we try to move into algebra, we try to move into trigonometry. If we don't have the discipline, the basic discipline of simple arithmetic, there's no hope for us. I know this through personal experience. There's no hope for us when we get into the more complicated. And then after we have mastered the principles of algebra and trigonometry, then we can start to go into more complicated areas of mathematics, into calculus. So what we have to understand is that mathematics as a principle is available to everyone. But we, as students, we have to make ourselves ready to receive it. We have to be open and willing to receive it. I was listening to some of Joel Goldsmith's work, and one of the students asked him to explain the difference between a lecture and a lesson, because he referred to what he did as a lesson. And I believe that what we do here is a lesson. It's something to think about, but it's something to interact with. Stuart Grayson, who is the pastor, Dr. Stuart Grayson, who is the pastor up in the New York City church for many years, if you've ever listened to one of his Sunday talks, he always concluded them by saying, "Thus concludes today's lesson." Okay? So what is the difference between a lecture and a lesson? And a lecture is kind of a passive thing for the audience. The audience might just sit back and listen. But the idea of a lesson is that the audience is engaged, the student is engaged. So a student is someone who has a stake in the game. A student is someone who has an obligation to participate, an obligation to take notes, an obligation to do homework, and those sorts of things. The student comes to learn, and the teacher presents the information, works with the student, tries to help the student build in blocks and steps, start at the beginning and start with arithmetic, and then so on and so on and so on. But the principle of mathematics, the principle of calculus, is available to everyone at all times. It does not withhold itself from anyone. It is a matter of our making ourselves available to it and making ourselves ready for it. So we want to kind of think of this in a spiritual context. We want to think of this thing that we call the Christ, right? The Christ being the presence of the divine within man. As Dr. Holmes would define it, right? Where God and human meets, right? Which is at the inside of each and every one of us. We didn't create ourselves. It created us out of itself. And when the human consciousness becomes aware of the presence of the divine within, right? This is the beginning, the awakenings of the Christ consciousness within us. Different cultures call it by different names. In Buddhism, we have the Buddha consciousness. In China, we had the Tao. Different ways of kind of explaining the same thing, but they're all, as Dr. Holmes tells us, if you look at what the mystics, right, the Sufis called it the beloved. The beloved. My beloved is within me, my beloved. Right? That all of these cultures are trying to point us to this idea that there is this principle of God within us. There is this presence of God right here where we are. Omnipresence, everywhere present, right here. But it cannot force itself upon us. As the poet says, it lays in quiet repose, awaiting for our discovery. Just like calculus cannot force itself upon us, but lays in quiet repose. And in my case is still lying waiting to be discovered. There is this beauty, there is this grace, there is this love, there is this presence that is there. But we must acknowledge it. We must let it be born into our consciousness. We must nurture it and love it. We must let it grow. And because we are each at different levels of understanding and of maturity, it reveals itself to us in a manner that is appropriate for our stage of development. So just as a teacher would take students who had never seen mathematics and start them with arithmetic, the presence of the divine within us, the Christ consciousness within us, reveals itself to us in different ways, at different levels. So for the sake of discussion, you'll hear me talk about the 3 levels of consciousness, and there are people who talk about 8 levels of consciousness and 12 levels of consciousness, and that's good. You can get down to those levels, but 3 is good. We understand things in 3, and many things in life come to us in 3s. we are kind of familiar with that, right? And the number 3 in ancient times had a feeling of completeness to it when people used the number 3. Even today, if you watch politicians give a speech, they'll usually say something 3 different ways, and then they'll move on to another point. This idea of 3 kind of does it. So we have the 3 kind of different levels of human consciousness. Now, if you have seen the movie, we used to show the movie at the center, The Razor's Edge, with Tyrone Power and Gene Tierney, a black and white version from 1948, I think it was, or 46, somewhere around there. And the story is about this man who goes off to India on a spiritual quest, and he gets a guru, and he's studying with the guru. And the guru is kind of explaining to him how spiritual growth works. And this man is like me. He's got books everywhere, books all around him that he's reading. And the guru explains to him, he says, there's three major paths of yoga. Yoga being the union, the connection, also being the practice and the discipline to get us there. There's three different paths of yoga. There's the path of service, there's the path of knowledge, and there's the path of love, or the yoga of service, the yoga of knowledge, and the yoga of love. And the guru looks at the books that the man has, and he says, you have chosen the yoga of knowledge. I want you to think of those 3 levels of consciousness: the yoga of service, the yoga of knowledge, and the yoga of love. And think of those as 3 different levels that we, as each of us goes through those levels, by the way. Because the guru goes on in the movie to tell him, but when you get to the end, you see, you realize that there was only one path. It just looked like 3 along the way. When you get to the top of the mountain, you realize that all paths reach the same place. So that's a great model. That's a great model to work with as we look at the 3 levels of consciousness, the 3 yogas, which are perhaps a school of spiritual practice to help us develop And we can look at this idea of, well, what is the Christ? What does the Christ mean? What is this thing that we're getting ready for, Christmas Day? How are we going to welcome the presence of God within us into our lives this year? That's the real question. Am I going to experience the divine in a different way than I did last year? Have I just kind of repeated 365 days? Have I grown a little bit? Have I moved a little bit? So the first level, the one that we talk about, the first level is the one where by and large most of the world is at today. We know that from observation. We know that from analysis, from when I was in organizational change. We actually had instruments that we could use, psychological instruments to have people fill out, and we could analyze an organization and do an assessment. We could go around and observe different behaviors. We could observe what was going on in an organization, and we could tell pretty much, within a short period of time, we could tell pretty much where that organization fell in a maturity scale that we used. It's a good way to think of it, the maturity of our human consciousness. But at that first level, we're just kind of really coming into our own, into kind of some understanding of the self. What is the self, I think it's amazing that in our Western culture, we've been studying physical or material phenomena for hundreds of years. And when it comes to the basic question of, well, what is consciousness? We don't know. We don't have an answer. We don't even know how we would prove it. We don't even know. We can't weigh it. We can't measure it. We can't touch it. We can see the results of it. We can see the effects of it. We all experience it. But when it comes down to defining it scientifically, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. One group of scientists tried to define consciousness as the sum total of everything that the brain created. And another group of scientists said, well, how would you prove that? See? How do you know? Isn't that just your bias or your opinion? And you're using your consciousness to create a definition of consciousness that satisfies you. But how do you know that, see? So in this first level, the experience of life is that the power is out there, and we are kind of either victims or victors. Very much you see this going on in our society. You got to win. It's about winning. You have to win. It's about getting stuff. It's about having power. It's about being in control. Right? Very much the kind of things that would be associated with the first three chakras in the Hindu chakra system. We've got to survive. We've got to survive. And then when we survive, we have to procreate. We have to make more of whatever it is. If you're a business, you want to open franchises, If you're a country, you want to expand your territory. Think of the United States. Think of the colonies. No sooner did the Europeans get here, and they kept trying to push further and further west until the European dream of the American continent became pretty much reality. We want to survive. We want to expand. We want to dominate. We want to have our will to be the one that wins. And much of life at this first level of consciousness is caught up at those three energy centers, caught up in the activities that are associated with those three things. And here the concept of the Christ, this is the Savior consciousness. Here the concept of the Christ is a power outside of ourselves, different than ourselves, a great exception to the human race. Comes this power of divinity, this power where the divine has become human, but is still fully divine. And somehow it is going to save us from all of our troubles. Somehow is going to offer itself as a sacrifice for all of the terrible things that we have done. And in so doing, now all of our debts are paid. Everything is washed away. And that idea of the Christ is very appealing. When we think that we are victims, when we think that we are wicked, when we think of all the terrible things that we've done, and we need somehow, because we can't do it ourselves, we need something outside of ourselves to do it. And it's a start. It's a starting place of recognizing the presence of the divine within. It's a starting place. Now I realize that many of us have at times in our lives, or we know people at times in our lives who tell us this is the only definition. It's the only understanding. It's the right one and the only right one. And that's okay, because that's part of that level of consciousness as well. Now William James, who wrote the Varieties of Religious Experience, came along and said, at this point of accepting the fact, at level 1 consciousness, of accepting the fact that the presence of the divine is with us, with humanity, Emmanuel, God is with us. At this point of realizing then that everything is now okay, because all of whatever debt we think has been owed has been paid, then life, you might think that life changes fundamentally. It's much different. And what James wrote was that actually nothing changes much. People don't change their behavior much. They just feel better about things. I'm not trying to put anybody down. Believe me, I'm talking about the phases of growth, because I went through this. Everybody goes through this. We all go through this evolution of life. We all go through this evolution of our soul. We've got to ask ourselves, well, why is that? See, why is it that we can be aware of the fact that the presence of the divine is with us? We can be aware of the fact that we don't have to live in fear anymore, that we can live in hope and optimism, and yet people, ourselves included, may not fundamentally change. And the reason for that is we have to practice. We have to have discipline. See, at that first level, it's about developing discipline. Now, discipline is the ability to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. That's what discipline is. Right? So, if we consider the writings of the New Testament and what we have been told at that level, what we have been told, we have to put that into practice. That we have to have the discipline to do the things that people were told to be done, what we were told we must do. To pray for our enemies, to bless one another, to open our hearts up, to tear down these barriers of separation between one and another, and to recognize that we are all the divine children. And we haven't done that. We, human society, we have not done that, to put down our nets and come follow, to give away our riches and come follow. We haven't done that yet. As a society, we haven't done that. We're still very much tied to materialism. So level 1 is the material level, Emma Curtis Hopkins would call it. In science, we believe that matter, creates consciousness. And in our secular life, we believe it's the material things in life that we must have. And our idea then, as this idea of the presence of God coming into our lives starts to come into us, it is very much tied into behavior, very much tied into obeying the rules, which is good. There's nothing wrong with the commandments. There's nothing wrong with obeying the rules. There's nothing wrong with not stealing from one another, not killing one another. All of these ideas are good ideas. But we haven't yet mastered them. We haven't yet obeyed those commandments, right? We haven't gotten to the very essence of love God as you would love yourself. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Love God with everything that you have. Right? with all that you are, your whole heart, your whole soul. Love, right? We're also told that by the saint later on that we've given one commandment, right? Love. Love and do what you will. He didn't even say love God and do what you will, because if you know what love is, you don't need to say love God, because God is love, right? We're told that God is love. So what we want to understand about this is that all of us have this level 1 consciousness within us. All of us have this idea that there is power outside of us. All of us have this idea in some way or shape or form that we are either victims or victors. You know, the news is full of it every day about how the government's going to do this, that, or the other thing that's going to have a negative impact on us. And what we must come to realize then is that there is a part of us that can in fact benefit from saying, I need to just accept the Christ, the presence of the divine. I just need to accept that it is that which is going to take me out of the human experience. It is that which is going to lead me into a deeper realization of my spiritual nature. It is that which is going to help me to find a greater experience within the kingdom. And I will exercise the discipline to do the spiritual practices that are appropriate at that level of consciousness for my continued growth. And we talked about those last week. We talked about the repentance. We talked about the forgiveness. We talked about the praying for your enemies, the sharing, the tithing, the blessing, the gratitude. All of these things are behaviors. All of these things are spiritual practices. All of these things are designed when you are at functioning in a level 1 consciousness to help us to grow, just as adding and subtracting and learning your multiplication tables are designed to help you master the fundamentals of arithmetic so you can move on. So you can move on to algebra and trigonometry and calculus. We come to the second level of consciousness. The first level of consciousness, let me just say that the primary emotion there is one of fear. And you can see that. You can see that in the religions that are very, very popular at level 1 consciousness. The adherents are always taught that they must be afraid of something. They're afraid of their enemies, or they're afraid of God, but fear is a dominant emotion. We start to move into the second level of consciousness. And whereas the first level of consciousness might be considered the yoga of service, the yoga of discipline, the yoga of doing, and selfless service, the second level might be considered the yoga of knowledge. Because what happens then at the second level, we start to realize that we as souls, we as individual souls, as we are growing, we have a responsibility to be that student that I was talking about. We have a certain responsibility. The divine, at level 1, we might be sitting there waiting for the divine to do something for us. At level 2, we start to come to a different understanding. Perhaps the Lord helps those who help themselves. We have to participate in it. You see, we have to actively participate in the growth of our soul. We have to make ourselves more available to receive. So we start to recognize then that the things that we experienced in level 1 were a reflection of our consciousness. It's done unto us according to our belief. We start to dwell on this. It's done unto us according to our belief. So level 2, we start to ask ourselves, well, what do I believe? What is belief? What is consciousness? We don't know. What is belief? We don't know. Belief, you might say, is a state of consciousness, but how do you weigh it? How do you measure it? How do you test it? So at level 2, what happens is we want to learn more. We want to intellectually know more. We want to study with the best teachers who can help us learn what we need to learn in order to be the best at whatever it is we choose to be the best at. And when it comes to experiencing the presence of the divine, the Christ, when it comes to our concept of the Christ at this phase at level 1, the Christ is the Savior. At level 2, it's the way shower. It is the way shower. Who is the one who showed us the best? Who is the one who taught us the best? Who is the one who gave us the greatest example? Not the greatest exception, but the greatest example of what it means to live our life, our lives in contact with the divine. So much so in contact with the divine that Jesus said, when you're looking at me, you're looking at the Father. I'm gone. I'm not here. There is no me. Kind of saying. So at level 2, we want to know what that is. You see, I want to know what that is. I want to understand that. I want to learn about that. We start to study many different scriptures, many different religions, and we start to see how things are more alike than they are different. Level 1, we look at things to find out why they're different. Level 2, we look at things to find out why are they the same. How are they the same? The messages of the Buddha, the messages of Jesus, great similarities, if we will stop and look for them. So at level 2, what happens is we now are starting to become more aware of the presence of the divine within us, the Christ consciousness within us. We are aware that it functions through us at the level of consciousness or the level of belief that we provide for it. Our emotions is hope. It is optimism. We feel very good. We feel very good about life. Life is good and I'm part of it. God is good and God made me out of itself. I am part of it. And interestingly enough, William James looked at this at this group of people as well and said, you would think at this point that life becomes absolutely wonderful. Because these people no longer feel like they're lost. Not only have they been found, but now they know how to actively participate in the growth of their soul and in the living of their lives. And what James said again was, but nothing significantly changes other than that people feel better about themselves. And we have to again ask, well, why? Well, why is that? How could we come into this awareness that it is nearer than our hands and feet, it is closer than our breath? How can we come into this knowledge that it is done unto us according to our belief, and we have tools and techniques and ways of praying that we understand are for the purpose of changing us, right? Not changing God. Right? Level 1, we're trying to convince God to do something different. Level 2, we're trying to convince us to accept something different, you see. And again, it comes down to the practice, the yoga, the discipline. See, if you don't have the discipline, if you didn't develop discipline at level 1, when you get to level 2, it's no good. You don't have the discipline to do what you need to do. You don't have the discipline to sit in meditation, to do your daily spiritual practice, to do your treatment, to continue to read, to continue to grow, to continue to expand your mind. But assuming that you do, assuming that you've completed your journey through level 1, that you haven't just kind of, flipped through level 1 and tried to jump into level 2, and now you're kind of moving back into level 1 and back and forth. But assuming that you're into level 2, we have to say, well, what does the Christ mean at level 2? And the Christ is the master teacher at level 2. At level 1, it kind of shakes us out of our fear and says, don't be afraid. I am here. I am the presence. I am here. I am with you. And I won't let you be lost. At level 2, it says, come follow me. Now, come follow me. Pay attention to what I was doing. Pay attention to how I did those things. Grow with me. Do these things in my name. It means do them the way that I did them. So now we start to understand. At level 1, the Lord's Prayer was a series of words that we would repeat. At level 2, we're looking at kind of the way that the words are structured. It starts off with an acknowledgement of what God is. Our Father which art in heaven. Hallowed, whole be your name. Whole be your name. Our relationship with God, Father and child. See, we start to look at this and we start to say, well, this is a way of teaching us how to pray, not teaching us what to pray for, but teaching us how to pray. We start to understand in a different context entirely what our spiritual nature is. Our union with the divine. We start to realize when we are told that all of these things I have done, you can do and more, if you will seek first the kingdom. Now we start to take that as our instruction, that what we must do is seek that kingdom. And where are we going to find that kingdom? There's only one place that we can find it, in our own consciousness. And we can't find it out there because it's not out there. We're told go within. So now as we start to get into the second level, as we start to understand the Christ as the great example, the way shower, the master teacher, now we want to be students, you see. Level 1, we want to be followers, and that's good. That's good at level 1. At level 2, we want to be students. We want to learn. Right? We want to take the things that the teacher has shown us, and we want to be able to do them ourselves. We want to be able to master them ourselves. We don't want to sit there and watch the teacher on the blackboard write out all of the problems in algebra and just nod our heads and go, oh, isn't that nice? We want to be able to take our pencil and paper, and we want to be able to work out those problems ourselves. We want to understand it. We want to make it our own. Okay? And when it comes now to our spiritual growth, it's not enough to just be an observer. But now at level 2, as we start to accept the Christ consciousness in our lives at level 2, now we want to be a participant. We want to know more. We want to grow more. We want to be the best student of our soul that we can possibly be. And then there's the third level of consciousness, which might be considered the yoga of love, right? So the yoga of service was level 1. The yoga of knowledge was level 2. And then we get to level 3. And this is why the saying, the razor's edge, comes up. So level 1 is the material level. Level 2 is the mental or the intellectual level. And level 3 is the spiritual level. And at level 2, what happens is we come to realize the intellect comes to realize that the intellect is not capable of knowing all that there is to know, that there is a way of knowing that is beyond the intellect. There's a realization, an inner knowing that comes. And I got to tell you, this is kind of been a fundamental argument with church establishments and individuals for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years. You know, how do you know what you know? How do you know what you know spiritually? When the American colonies were founded by the English, the Anglican Church was the established religion. And not everybody who came to this country was Anglican. The Scots came and brought their Presbyterian religion with them. The Germans came and brought their Lutheran religion with them. And these people were stuck paying taxes to support the Anglican Church. They weren't too happy about it. The Anglican Church couldn't graduate ministers because their ministers had to be college educated. They couldn't graduate their ministers fast enough to to service the growing population. And people started to develop their own ideas about religion. Religious organizations grew in which the ministers were not college educated, and it wasn't a requirement because it was more important that they be called, that they be called by the divine. It would be more important that something within them told them what was true and what was not true. The Quakers in England, in Europe, when they started and they came to this country, were persecuted because they said it's more important to go within and find that which is true than what somebody else reads out of a book and tells you is true. This is getting into the level 3. This is getting into the level 3 consciousness in which the Christ is. The Christ is the presence within me. And the I, the ego I, the I of who I thought I was, dissolves. And the I that I am is the consciousness of God as me. This is very, very tough point because people will say, well, oh my God, that's egotistical. You're telling us that you're God. Right? This is why the mystics get killed and crucified and beheaded and all these kind of things. Because the fundamentalists don't understand what this person at the mystical level is saying is there is no I. There is no me, Jim. There is no I, human I. The human I is completely gone. The human I is completely absorbed. And what's left is the mystical I. It is the presence of God that is wearing the unique costume as me. So as we start to move into the level 3 consciousness, we start to realize that the Christ, the presence of the divine within, that is the essence of what I am and who I am. That is the I that I am. And again, it's not a human I. It's not an egotistical I. The ego has been dissolved at this point. Rumi tells us in a beautiful poem, he says, if you take a ruby and you hold the ruby up to the sunrise, can you tell where the ruby begins and the sun ends? And it's not the ruby that's shining, it is the light of the sun that is shining as it and through it. And when we take our soul, when we take the essence of what we are and we hold it up to the presence of God, the mistaken ideas, the materialistic ideas are gone. The intellectual ideas are gone. And what is left is a knowing and experiencing of the presence. And it is that experience that we crave. It is that experience that our heart truly desires. Again, Rumi will tell us it's like a moth to the flame. We will beat our heads against the glass that covers the candle until one day the glass is removed and the moth flies straight into the flame. Even though its body be consumed, it does so for the ecstasy of being united with the flame. And this is the image that we want to have of level 3. At level 2, we might tend to use the power of prayer to try to make things better at level 1. And Goldsmith says we're just trying to bring God down to the human level to make for a better human experience. As we continue to advance into level 2, we say, I don't want to make level 1 better. I want to be united with the flame. I want to realize fully what that unification means. And that is the mystical. That is the mystical union, the mystical Christ. Love being the experience of the unity. That is the yoga of love. So as we go through this Christmas season, as we get ready for Christmas, remember it is a holiday to ask us to receive the Christ in our hearts, the presence of God within, to receive it in our hearts. And we have to have some idea of what it is that we are receiving. And what I'm suggesting is that there's no one right idea. That we need to receive a little bit at level 1 because there's a part of us that's still functioning at level 1. We need to receive a lot of it at level 2 because in a teaching such as this we are primarily focused on level 2, but we need to open ourselves up to receive that mystical experience, that mystical moment of just simply being at home with the beloved. Because that is where we are going. Levels 1 and level 2 were only stepping stones on the way to level 3, the mystical union, the experience of the presence of God. So let's do our practice, whatever practice is appropriate for us. If we need rules and regulations to follow, then let's follow them. If we need to take time to meditate and to do our treatment and to do our readings and to listen to talks, then let's do them. And if we need time to be still at level 3, to be still and to know and to just be one, to the point where there's no telling where God ends and we begin, because there is no we. There is just it. We need to take time for that. It's a matter of balance. It's a matter of dedication. It is a matter of discipline. And it is a matter of trust. Trust. So I invite you this Christmas season, please take some time to contemplate your own lives and the things that we've talked about today, and ask yourself, where in my life have I experienced things at level 1? Where at level 2? And where have I had the mystical glimpse of level 3? Am I doing the things that I know that I ought to do at each level? Am I beginning my day with an invitation to the divine to make its presence more fully known to me today? Am I willing to let go of the things at level 1, the material things, and the things at level 2, the intellectual things? Oh, how smart am I? Am I willing to let all of that go? And as the moth into the flame, am I willing to let it all be burned for the ecstasy of unification? Divine love has created us each and every one out of itself in a unique way, and it speaks to us in a unique way, and it presents itself to us in a unique way. Let us accept the presence of the divine, the Christ within us, in the way or ways that is appropriate for our growth right now. And let us dedicate ourselves to experience it more fully as the year goes by. For this purpose we have come, and so it is.